This is Modern Mindset, the show that picks the brains of the world's leading minds to help you unlock yours. I'm your host, Adam Cox, and joining me today we have Hege Kristoffersen from Femnifique, a life coach specializing in feminine energy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a bit about your background, because you have this kind of hybrid mix of talents that you've kind of fused together. Tell us a bit about where you came from and what you do now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a singer-songwriter as well, so obviously very creative, and recently launched this life coaching business, Femnifique. I'm very passionate about empowering women because a few years ago I came out of an emotionally abusive relationship, which really it led me to embarking on this journey of personal development and discovery and healing. So I had life coaching myself and found it really transformational, really dove into psychology, spirituality, and personal development so that I could find answers to really empower myself and move forwards with my life. I knew when I came out of that situation that I had to take responsibility and make some changes. So I was really looking for answers, and that's really led me to where I am today, where a lot of women come up to me and they say, "Oh, you're so inspiring." And I found myself naturally coaching other women. So I decided, why not just create a business around this, because it's something that I'm so passionate about and love to talk about.
It's going to sound controversial, but some of the best songs of the last few decades have come from singer-songwriters that have gone through tough times. Do you think sometimes trauma, pain, troubles are a good ingredient to a good song?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think it's very healing, not just for the songwriter and performer, but also for the audience who listen. I think a lot of people, they say, there are certain people out there who think, oh, music should be uplifting and happy and make you want to dance, and we don't want sad songs, but I think there's tremendous value in songs in all different, emotional with emotional messages, because art is life, right? Art is supposed to reflect every aspect of life, and life isn't always easy. It's sometimes hard and difficult. So when we write about that in a song, we heal through that. For me, I know that it really allows me to process the experience and also to learn more about myself. Things from the subconscious come out when you create, and it makes you aware of things you weren't previously aware of. And then also, I think for the listener, they tap into that. So for them, it also is allowing them to express something that maybe they hadn't allowed themselves to express. And that causes a lot of healing. It leads to a lot of healing. So I think there's tremendous value in that for everyone, really.
Because there are certain therapeutic techniques that revisit the point of the trauma and keep thinking about it from different perspectives as a way of desensitizing from that and almost creating an element of dissociation. When you do your performances live of your songs, do you feel like you're going back to the very moment that the thing that the song's about you're in, almost like a form of regression? Or do you just treat it like, well, that's a memory and I turned it into a song, and it becomes more like you're performing something that you created, but you're not necessarily tapping into the same emotion, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. No one's actually ever asked me that before. I think that you're always going to be attached in some ways, at least for myself, to what that song, what the origin of that song was. But you of course are going to be detached from it also, because it's not as fresh. I find that, in the moment you create the song, and if it's quite fresh and raw, there will be a time period where maybe it would be quite difficult to, distance yourself from that because it is so fresh. But then after a while, it just becomes another song that you sing, and you tap into it to be able to express the emotion, but it doesn't really affect you very much. And maybe that also shows how healing it is, that you can come back to a song and think that, gosh, I was so emotional when I wrote this, and maybe for a while I wouldn't even have been able to sing it, but now I can sing it fine, and it's just a part of my journey now.
Because it sounds almost like, metaphorically speaking, at the point where you create the song, the emotion is so raw, and then each time you revisit or perform or even hear it, I guess, it becomes almost like a photocopy. So it's of the same thing, but it slightly evolves, changes each time, and dilutes in some way.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of seeing it. And I think that's true. I think it does do that.
So in terms of your experience, it sounds like one of the key catalysts that you went through in order to kind of go on your journey of taking personal responsibility and healing was an abusive relationship.
Mm.
Did you know it was abusive at the time, or did it take an element of perspective for you to realize what was going on?
I don't think I saw it as that at the time. I think abusive is a very strong word that we associate with a lot of things, and we all have an identity as well. And I had an identity of, I didn't think that I would ever be in an abusive relationship. I just didn't think that would ever be possible for me. And when I was in it, I knew that it wasn't a healthy relationship, but I didn't think of it as abusive. I don't think I wanted to think of it as that because of what that would mean about me. And that's probably why I didn't realize until actually a few years later, where I really started to, I was continuing on with a healing journey. I had been triggered by something else, and that led me to do even more research and healing. And I started reading a lot about it, and I realized that actually was what it had been.
Mm. So it took you to kind of come out the other side and process what it is, because I think a lot of people, they have that element of cognitive dissonance while they're in it. And it sounded like, because you identified as being a strong person, there was
Mm.
this feeling of, well, while it's happening, that can't be happening to me because it wouldn't happen to someone like me. But it was only when you got through that that you could see, oh, actually now the pieces kind of make sense. What were the clues? Because it might be that someone's listening right now that are experiencing in real time some of the things that you have experienced in the past. And
Mm.
like you not knowing it at the time, maybe they could kind of almost perceive some things that are happening to them that they don't consider abusive, but might be with the benefit of, hearing someone else say it. What are some of the clues that if someone's listening, maybe they should pick up on that they might be in an emotionally abusive relationship?
I think there was a lot of gaslighting, which I didn't even know what was at the time. So um, provoking me to be angry about something or upset about something, and deliberately, and then labeling me as unstable, emotionally unstable. So I, for a long time, believed that I was emotionally unstable. I was even told I had a personality disorder, which of course wasn't true. I've said this to friends and family, and they say, you definitely don't have a personality disorder. But he wanted me to believe that I was unstable so that he could control me, basically.
Mm.
So that was obviously a big thing. But when I was in it, I didn't realize that was what he was doing. So it's very dangerous behavior, and yeah, it's obviously traumatic in a lot of ways to go through that kind of thing, because it really breaks down your confidence and your sense of self, and it takes a long time to get that back. It can take a long
Mm.
time.
Yeah. And for the purpose of any audiences listening, the term gaslighting, I think, came from a black and white film from the 1930s or 40s, where someone would literally, change the intensity of the lights to pretend that someone was, thinking things were lighter or darker than they actually were, to question their own sanity, to be
Mm,
manipulated. And it's become much more used in kind of common parlance now. Do
yes.
you think that's because there is a growing awareness of psychological principles and how they're used in different contexts? Or is it because that for some people, it's a convenient way to um, process what was happening? And maybe, we spoke briefly before we started recording, to have a bad person and a good person. Is it potentially in some cases a way of saying, well, that was happening and that was the person that did that? Do you think that can happen as well?
Yeah, I think yes to both of those questions. I think firstly, there is a growing awareness for psychological terms and even emotional abuse as well, and psychology in general, which I think is amazing. And I think social media has facilitated that as well. You see a lot of psychotherapists now with a large following, actually, and I think that's brilliant. I follow a few of them myself. I love listening and learning. I think also you're right that it can be used as an excuse, as an opt-out of saying, I was the victim and this happened to me, and this was the villain and I was the good person. And that's a very dangerous trap to fall into. And I think one of the big misconceptions about emotional abuse or abuse in general, that there is a good person and a bad person, because we all want to see ourselves as good, right? No one wants to see themselves as bad. No one wants to visit those shadow aspects of themselves, which really I don't believe anyone is really ever good or bad, you know. I believe we're all people trying our best with where we've been and what we've learned about ourselves and the world. And I think it's a tricky one, because I think a lot of people, they have fear of visiting their own unhealed aspects. But I think when someone treats you badly, it's because they feel bad about themselves, you know, deep down. Narcissism, that's another thing that's popping up all over the internet now. Oh, I was a victim of narcissistic abuse. And then the narcissist is always labeled as the bad guy, but it's a lot more complex than that, I believe. And also, I think there's this huge misconception around narcissism as well, because I think that narcissists aren't people who think that they're amazing and better than everyone else. I think deep down, they actually really loathe themselves. That's just what you don't see. And because when you feel really good about yourself, you don't need to treat other people poorly. You don't need to control other people, right? So that's one misconception. And I think I see it a lot, actually, with a lot of women who have come out of similar situations as me, where they have come out of it, but they're not really out of it, because they're mentally still there, you know, and they're playing the blaming game, you know, which is understandable, but it keeps you stuck, you know, when you say, he was doing this, and then they keep talking about it. And in talking about it, they never take responsibility or visit any of the aspects of themselves that allowed them to get into that relationship in the first place. Because we have unhealed aspects, all of us, we have that within our psychology. And it leads to different things, but there's a lack of self-worth there, you know, that has led that to happen. And that's what most people don't want to face. They don't want to face why do I feel this way? It's also buried so deep. But if we don't have the courage to visit those shadow aspects of ourselves, we cannot heal. And I think healing and doing that inner work is the hardest thing that a human being can do, because, you know, we always say, well, you can't change other people. That's true, but you can change yourself. And that's the hardest thing you can do, is going on that journey, but it's definitely possible.
Because it's that maxim, isn't it? You know, hurt people, you know, people that have got those kind of issues themselves, because it is so difficult to take that responsibility. There is that kind of desire to kind of either through comparison or control, get some of those emotional needs, maybe not in the best way, but still in a viable way for that person with their skills, their resources. And you're right, like gaslighting, I think narcissism is a phrase that is used more and more often. And I think it's one of those things that almost becomes, you know, what I would almost consider witches of the kind of the 16th century. It's kind of like, if someone was labeled a witch, whatever they did would prove that they were a witch. And it's kind of like, you know, in many ways, it seems like labeling someone a narcissist, well, if they deny it, well, that's evidence that they're a narcissist. And if they try and get out of it, then that's evidence that they're a narcissist. And if they take ownership and say, well, maybe I'm a narcissist, well, of course, that's what a narcissist would say. It becomes almost like a very easy way to find a villain. And the thing is, I think there are genuinely people with a narcissistic, you know, kind of disorder.
Yes, definitely.
But I also have this kind of creeping suspicion that for those people that want to be the victim in the story, because it gives them that element of empathy and pity and understanding from their network, and that's a very convenient villain to find, if that makes sense. How, in your opinion, because obviously you've got a unique perspective, someone that has been at the hands of emotional abuse, how do you think someone could filter out, let's say, true emotional abuse from, let's just say, the kind of emotions that can happen, the kind of things that can happen in any relationship that might be, upsetting or traumatic. And also, how could someone, let's say, fish out a true narcissist from someone that just has, I don't know, certain tendencies that could be labeled narcissistic?
I think in terms of, I mean, every relationship is going to have ups and downs and arguments and things like that. That's normal, right? But I think if there's a pattern of disrespect, because there was also a lot of disrespect in this relationship, you don't feel valued, you don't feel respected, you don't really feel like you're treated well. And that is obviously an issue, right? So I think looking at patterns, when things become a pattern and happen repetitively, that is something to really watch out for. If it's, even if you're having an argument, you can have an argument in a respectful way where you communicate and you value each other. There's love there, there's no love in these relationships, really. That's the thing. It's just two wounded people who are kind of sticking together because they meet each other's needs in a funny way. Even though it was dysfunctional, it met a need for me. It met the need that was kind of safe in that relationship in a way. So that's something to be aware of as well. And in terms of spotting real narcissists versus people who are not real narcissists, I'm not an expert on this, but I mean, there are certain things, I guess, where I remember him saying, for instance, that he knew that every room he walked into, he was the most intelligent person. And it was just sort of arrogance on his part, which actually I believe stemmed from, insecurity or something that was probably a deeper issue. But I mean, yeah, I think if there's no empathy there, it's difficult, because there can be empathy as well. That's the thing. There can be empathy in periods, and then in other periods there isn't. So that, I think in general, what to look out for is if there's no consistency in or there's consistency and lack of consistency, I should say. So it's you never know what to expect. Am I going to be treated well today, or am I going to be disrespected? And that leaves you on edge as well, because you don't quite you can rely on that person to be there for you in a way, but you also don't quite know when they're going to suddenly be disrespectful and be a bit bullying, actually, right? So yeah, I would say be aware of that.
Yeah. And these are the kind of like psychological techniques used in when you've got like terrorists like in prison camps. There is complete unpredictability. Nobody knows what's going to happen next, almost to kind of wear them down to be compliant effectively. So it does seem like these principles are not just used by police and secret service organizations and military. It's kind of within relationships as well. What was the key breakthrough for you, leaving that dark place, to enable you to because to use your words, a lot of people stay there, even if they physically left the relationship that's no longer right for them, psychologically, mentally, they're still there. What did it take for you to move on? What was the kind of the catalyst for that?
I think as soon as I physically left the relationship, I had mentally left as well. I knew that I had created this, and that I knew that if I wanted a better future, I had to do some serious inner work. And I knew that was going to be hard and uncomfortable, but I think I had experienced the low points, and I knew that I would rather do that than to experience that again. So for me, as soon as I left, I made that commitment to myself that now I really have to, sort myself out so that I can attract something better in the future. And that's when I started getting, life coaching, and I had a little bit of therapy as well, which I think is great. And I think there should be no shame around having that. That takes courage also. And yeah, then I started really studying personal development and psychology and spirituality and everything I could lay my eyes on, really.
Because one of the most powerful metaphors that I think I've came across in terms of, if you don't learn from mistakes, you're destined to repeat them. is the movie Groundhog Day. I don't know if you've seen
Oh
that
yeah, I love
movie.
that. Yeah.
And you've got this kind of main character, and every day is exactly the same day. And the only way he breaks free from that is by actually taking personal responsibility and learning lessons that he should have learned a long time ago. And then things finally move on. To what extent do you feel that that's a true, kind of statement, that unless people truly learn and take responsibility, sooner or later, the same thing's going to happen again?
I think that is very true. Obviously, I guess it depends what you're talking about, but I think it is very true. I think responsibility is so important, and often what fails people, or what makes people not being able to move forward, is that they're not taking responsibility. They're still playing the blaming game. And I think if you're blaming someone else, you're never going to move forward. It's a very disempowering thing. And the beautiful thing about taking responsibility is that, yes, it's not easy, but it's actually very empowering, because if you're responsible, you can change it. So that's what I would say. And unfortunately, some people are not ready, and very, very defensive about these things. So you can't really help someone unless they're ready to take responsibility.
It is challenging. I remember in my life, I had very, very severe anxiety, to the extent that I became a bit of a recluse at the late teens, early 20s. And for me, that was also the breakthrough. It was taking responsibility and saying, well, look, I'm not in a good place, but I'm 100% the reason why I'm here. It's what I believe. It's what I think. It's how I, evaluate previous experiences. It's kind of what my ambitions are. And all of these things combined mean that I'm exactly where I was meant to be at that point in time. And once I did that, it was a hard pill to swallow. But the good news is, once you do take on board everything, even the things that other people, did to you that maybe weren't fair and weren't just, if you even take responsibility, not necessarily for those things, but for your reaction or response to them, it almost gives you a fresh start to say, right, but knowing what I now know, what do I want to do different? Do I want to live in this place forever, or do I want to do something else? So you're right. It is a very difficult challenge to go through, to take that responsibility. What do you think stops people from doing that? Because we talked about this kind of almost Disney narrative of, you've got the hero and the villain, the good versus evil, which is a really, it's almost a narrative that we're brainwashed with throughout childhood. I remember watching, a movie with my children. They come in halfway through and they're like, who's the bad person? It's kind of like they need to have that kind of good versus evil kind of dynamic.
Yes.
Do you think that traps people into the kind of the almost reluctance to take responsibility? Because if they take responsibility, then they're kind of sharing part of the blame as to their own misfortune, whereas it's so much simpler to say, I'm in a horrible place, it's an awful place, but it's because of my parents, it's because of my ex-partner, it's because of this. It's a simpler narrative.
Yes, I think that's very true. And I think that that simplistic narrative is very appealing in many ways, because not only do you not have to take responsibility, but you don't really have to face those aspects of yourself that you're unaware of and that you don't want to revisit. Because everyone wants to think of themselves as a good person. And like I said before, I don't really believe it's about being good or a bad person. I think we all have wounding, right? Emotional wounding. And that often stems from childhood, or it can even be a thing that has been happening in generations, and we carry that with us. There's patterns of behavior. So we repeat what we're used to. And I think a lot of people, they don't want to take responsibility because it would change how they view themselves. It would change how they have this identity of who they are. And if they take responsibility, that identity disappears. And that is too much for them to take on. And this is something that I've seen in other people as well. And actually why a lot of people are very repressed also, because they have this identity, who I am and my story. And everything that doesn't fit in with that is buried. And if it comes up, it threatens the ego and that story. And some people maybe are not ready to face that, right? And that's why they don't. That's why they play the blaming game. But unfortunately, it keeps them stuck. So there should be more awareness around, this really, because there isn't black and white in life. And
it is shades of grey, isn't it? It's
yeah,
nuanced. And I think, it's almost like the blame game is like very heavy armor. At some level, it does protect, but it does
yes,
stop you moving forward because it's such a heavy thing to kind of carry around.
yes.
Your coaching company, Femnifique, where did the name come from? What does it stand for? What's it all about?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to create a brand name, and I didn't really know what I wanted to call it. I was thinking, and everything I came up with was already taken. So I asked actually for divine guidance. I said, I really want a unique name that has to do with, the feminine, and that embodies what my brand is about. And then as I was drifting off to sleep, I had the idea of Femnifique, and I immediately just wrote it down and grabbed it. It's a fusion between magnifique, magnificent, and feminine. So it's the magnificent feminine, if you like. And I really like that, because my coaching, I use standard life coaching as well as NLP, but I also use feminine energy as well. So I use the principles of feminine energy and some divine guidance, and I do oracle cards and things like that. So it's a very holistic approach to coaching. And it's basically the method that I've created from everything that I've done myself. And I think that all of these aspects work really well together to really bring about deep and lasting transformation.
And of course, you get masculine energy in women and feminine energy in men, but I'm guessing from the name, it's mainly women that you work with.
It's exclusively for women. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the major, let's say, life issues or problems that the women that you work with face that mean that finding a coach that specializes in the areas that you do can help them to move forward in their life?
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of women are feeling stuck, like they're not progressing or moving forward. So they struggle a lot with confidence, lack of confidence, procrastination. And of course, what is underpinning all of that is often limiting beliefs. They have a limiting belief that's holding them back. There's a fear of progression. There's a fear of moving forward. And again, that often has to do with stepping into a new version of yourself. Sometimes that's scary. It's scary how other people are going to see me now. It's all these things that are underneath the surface, below awareness, that people are not aware of, right? So that's really what's going on in a lot of ways with things like procrastination. I also think that women often get into this hustle mentality of wanting to hustle. And I've been there and done this many times. But, we are cyclical in energy as women. And so it doesn't necessarily serve us to have that linear energy, which is very masculine and very progressive. We need more of a balance and a cyclical balance. So working in harmony with that feminine energy and the cycles, and even with nature and the seasons, I think is so powerful. And, I love hustling, and, sometimes it's great to get up at 5 a.m. and the 5 a.m. club and all that. But I think for me, what I've adopted for myself is I have a very different routine in January from July, because I'm trying to live in harmony with the seasons and the cycles. So in the summer, I'll get up at 5:30 and I'll go to bed later, and I'll get more done and I'll feel good doing that then. But in winter, I'm going to bed a lot earlier. I'm rising a lot later because I need more rest. And that is what winter represents for me. And that's not something that's come natural to me. I like to hustle, so I kind of have to force myself, but it really is valuable. So having that balance and really prioritizing self-care for women is really, really important. So having a plan and goals and a strategic plan that is sustainable long-term is very important for women, because again, it's just, I see women having this tendency, and again, I've done this myself, but cramming so much in, where you can maybe keep that up for so long, but after a while, it doesn't work and it ends up really slowing you down and it hinders your progress long-term. So another thing I think is really important as well is the intention behind the actions that we take, because another thing that the hustle culture can often lead to is this urgency, and the urgency is often coming from this place of fear and self-doubt. I have to do XYZ within certain time frame, or something bad will happen, or I won't be able to get to where I want to go, or whatever it is. And that we're not aware that the underlying reason why we're taking this action is that self-doubt and fear. And that's actually really important because it brings the wrong energy to the table. So what we want to do is we want to bring this energy of calm and conviction, because it's all about the consistency, but the balance long term. So if we can bring any task that we want to do or anything we want to do, bring the energy of calm and conviction, that energy comes across when you're convinced about what you're doing. You're tackling with conviction, but there's no urgency or rush, because you know that you're doing what you want to do. What will happen is you're on the way to that anyway. It doesn't matter if it happens tomorrow or in 2 years or whatever, you have the conviction. So I think that's really important also. And that also leads to better results long term.
You're right. And I think this hustle culture, there's high profile, kind of gurus and kind of productivity experts and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of like constantly get stuff done and you can do more. And, these gaps here, you can get stuff in and wake up early and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like, the positive of that is that there are more tools than ever before to get a lot done and have a bigger impact. But you're right, the energy is such an important thing, because if there's a feeling of, well, I have to do this kind of stuff, there is real feelings of guilt and shame and comparison. If you feel like, well, you're not, waking up at 5 a.m. or you're not, having a weekend where you've done, 12-hour days and this Elon Musk 60-hour, 70-hour weeks and all this kind of stuff. So there is a strange dynamic. And I know obviously you're talking about, kind of mainly in women, this kind of element of flow, but a lot of the things that you're saying there, I think equally apply to men. There is this kind of feeling of almost like the law of reversed effect. Sometimes the harder you try, the less kind of results you get. And actually, when you just say, well, look, I'm going to do my very best. I'm going to trust the process. What will come actually means that you kind of take the pressure off yourself and you do a lot more anyway. So there is this kind of universal dynamic, but it seems like you've noticed a lot of success with women on that. You mentioned limiting beliefs. Are there some suspects that come up again and again, certain limiting beliefs that if, let's say, a woman is stuck or she's got challenges and things like that, that they tend to come up more often than not, as you think, yeah, there's probably going to be one of these kind of limiting beliefs that are there stopping things?
Well, actually, I don't know if you've read the book by Gay Hendricks, Take the Leap, and he talks about limiting beliefs, or core limiting beliefs there. And one very normal one is, I don't believe that I'm good enough, right? So you don't actually believe that you're worthy of what you want deep down. So that's one. Another one is being afraid of outshining other people, making other people uncomfortable. That's one. And then you also have betraying a family. Some people, or betraying people, they feel if they outgrow people, if they do well, they will betray where they came from because they're no longer in alignment with that, right? So that's another one. And then I think the fourth one was being afraid of being a burden. The more you have, the more burden it is to you and to others. So those are the four main ones. But I think really normal ones is, I think almost everyone has an element of, am I good enough?
Definitely. Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. And there is a positive side, I think, to the belief of not feeling like you're good enough if it encourages you to improve yourself or become better. And I think a lot of people attracted to self-improvement, tend to have that belief at some level, not good enough, so I'll get myself better. And I think from a competency point of view, that's a really positive thing. But it does mean that you're always chasing a mirage. Whenever you do better, the goalposts just move and you feel like you've got constantly do more. And that gives you that energy of, again, proving that you're not good enough.
Yeah.
The third one's a really interesting one though, isn't it? Because, feeling like, it's almost that kind of the sentiment of the more you have, the more problems you've got.
Yes, it was an interesting one that surprised me actually. But to touch on the being good enough again, I want to say that I think it doesn't matter so much about skills, and that's more, to me, more of an imposter syndrome. If you feel you're not good enough, you haven't got the skills. But I think the underlying belief of I'm not good enough is more a case of I believe that I'm fundamentally flawed. I believe that I'm not worthy of this, which I think no matter how many skills you get, no matter how competent you are, if that belief can still be there. I don't think it's necessarily related to skill, but yeah, so that's something to probably work on, because we're all worthy actually as we are, right? But we just, for some reason, we all don't always feel it. But yeah, the being a burden one, that's not one that I can relate to myself really, but I think that I remember the author, he was saying that he had been a burden. He felt like he had been a burden because he was an unexpected child and it wasn't planned for, and he'd never really felt that he was wanted, I guess. So that had led him to have that limiting belief, and it carried that on through life. So a lot of these things come from little things even that kind of happened to us early on, that we lead us to believe something about ourselves that isn't true, and then we subconsciously carry that with us.
Yeah. So self-perpetuate them, which can then lead to choice in partners. If you believe that you're not worthy, if you believe that you're a burden, unconsciously you might choose a partner that kind of treats you like you're not worthy. And then, you talked about responsibility of certain types of relationships. Perhaps a belief inadvertently causes you to kind of be attracted to someone that is going to validate a belief, no matter how awful that belief is, but it kind of reinforces that kind of perspective on the world.
I think so.
What would be your tips if someone's listening right now in terms of feeling that maybe they're not worthy or they're a burden, or perhaps that they can just relate to this feeling of procrastination or a lack of confidence? What would be your tips that they can start to move? Because obviously there's no magic wand here, but what can they do to start moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think becoming aware is the first step, becoming aware of what your limiting beliefs are. Because a lot of the time we procrastinate, we do things, we self-sabotage. We're not aware of the underlying reason why we do those things. And until we become aware of what that reason is, we can't really change it and move forward. So that's always step number one, is awareness. And when we have awareness, then we can start to notice how we show up in daily lives, notice how that belief is showing up for us in daily life, and the little things that we are assigning meaning to, and how we can change those things. I do think it is useful to work with a coach if you need to, or you can do a lot of research on your own. It depends how comfortable you are doing this stuff on your own. I'm obviously doing a lot of stuff on my own now because I've done it for so many years, that there's always, you never stop growing and learning. That's the thing. There's always another layer of the onion to be uncovered. But yeah, that's what I would say. Really focus on awareness, and then how you respond to things, really.
That's it. Yeah. Keep your eyes open. I also found, like, on that element of awareness, sometimes you've got to play a bit of a detective in your own life. And sometimes keeping a journal can give you clues as to what those limiting beliefs or issues, particularly those that come up again and again, then it gives you a clue that actually there is something to work on here, because it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a random act. It's coming up frequently, and therefore there might be something you can learn from that to kind of steer it in a different direction. If someone's listening right now and they want to reach out and learn more about you, maybe check out your music, maybe become a client of yours for Femnifique, what's the best way that they can track you down and connect with you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on Instagram. So my music is Hege Music, at Hege Music. And my website is also hegemusic.com. And Femnifique is femnifique.com, and at Femnifique on Instagram. So you can look me up on there and get in touch.
Fantastic. Hege, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
And to you at home, thanks for joining me on Modern Mindset. See you again soon for more.